Hello, everyone. Representative Angie Craig here. A few weeks ago, I had the honor of joining Tracy McNeil for a recorded conversation for the Women's Executive Network. I'm updating that conversation because a lot has happened between that taping and now. The brutal murder of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police officers has heightened the need for action in the area of police reform and highlighted the need to address systemic racism. There are severe disparities in our country for Black Americans in many areas, including healthcare, education, housing, and employment. In Minnesota, our racial disparities are among the worst in the country. I've been touched by the response to Mr. Floyd's death throughout the 2nd Congressional District. We've had pop-up food banks to help South Minneapolis and peaceful protests in places where organizing around racial inequality has never happened before. This is the start of a long overdue conversation that must trigger meaningful action. This week, Congress will vote on the Justice in Policing Act, which I co-sponsored to make meaningful policy reforms, and I will continue to support our policies to address systemic racism.
Hello, my name is Jennifer Brewery, and I am the CFO of AdvaMed, the Trade Association for Medical Device Manufacturers. I also serve as the Executive Director of AdvaMed Advance, our Industry Inclusion and Diversity Program, and AdvaMed WEN, our Women's Executive Network. Late last year, our WEN Chair, Tracy McNeil, CEO of Materna Medical, started an interview series in the WEN newsletter where she shared insight gained from inspiring women who have made it to incredible positions in this profession. We are delighted to take Tracy's interview series to a new medium, video. She is joined today by a fascinating leader and medtech industry veteran turned legislator, Representative Angie Craig. I'll turn it over to Tracy now, but if you want to learn more about WEN and read Tracy's past interviews, I encourage you to visit our site, www.advamed.org/WEN. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jen, and thank you so much, Representative Craig, for making time. I've been impressed with your success and inspired by the authenticity of your leadership for some time, so it's a real pleasure. Thank you for making time.
It's great to be here, Tracy.
So you spent time as an executive at both Smith & Nephew and St. Jude Medical, and I'm curious, what inspired your transition from industry to lawmaker?
Well, Tracy, I think you have to go a little bit further back than St. Jude and Smith & Nephew to understand it. But, I grew up in a single mother household. We lived in a mobile home court. We didn't actually have access to health insurance for much of the time growing up. So oddly, I think it was that childhood experience that led me to medical technology. As part of my responsibilities in medtech, I got to manage the St. Jude Medical Foundation. And so I got to help low-income women get access to health care. And as I worked my way up the corporate ladder, I was honored to be able to serve on the executive team at St. Jude Medical the last 11 years of my career in the sector. It really occurred to me that I could make a bigger impact on policy, both for folks to get access to health care, as well as just helping to create good paying jobs of the 21st century. So the truth is, I stepped off the sidelines and put my hat in the ring. Took me a couple of times to get through the finish line successfully, but that experience, all of it, has been such a value to bring to Congress.
Absolutely, that's incredible. What were some of the key messages that resonated with your constituency that made it possible for your 2018 election?
Well, I ran because, the ACA got implemented. I was the head of HR for St. Jude by the time the ACA was in effect, and I saw the good things that were brought about by the ACA, and I also saw some of the bad policy from it. So when I ran, healthcare was and continues to be the #1 topic in this country. How do we build a healthcare system where everyone has access to a basic level of healthcare, where we still have and encourage good new technologies, where people can afford their health insurance premium, where people can afford their brand name pharma drugs. So I brought that experience into the fight to become a member of Congress, and it's one of the main topics that I've been working on since I became a member.
You mentioned innovation just now. You came into office holding strong opinions about the medical device tax. What experience in the medtech industry helped form your stance on the repeal of the medical device tax?
Well, I was literally on the executive team at St. Jude when all across the industry we saw medtech companies making very, very difficult decisions to lay people off in order to make room in their operating plans to be able to cover the medical device tax. And by the time I got to Congress, the device tax had been put on hold, but seeing that retraction up close as an executive, and then being in Congress and knowing that if the device tax went back into effect in this year, that kind of retraction was going to happen all over again. So look, I advocated for repeal of the medical device tax as a candidate for Congress, as a member of the leadership team. But because I did not believe it was a fair tax, and I believe it cost jobs and was about to do the same. So I'm not afraid to step up and stand up, and I may be the only Democrat in Congress who actually had ads run against her because I was opposed to a tax. Usually the attacks against Democrats because we want a tax, but I must be the unique example there.
Well, I think, I mean, so AdvaMed has the majority of our constituents are small companies like myself that have innovations coming through the pipeline that then get acquired by large companies. And I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding in the public about the impact of that tax on innovation. But it was really exciting to see that success. So there were a lot of changes that happened in 2018. As a freshman, what is it like navigating a Congress with so many other freshmen? How do you get your voice heard?
Well, it's fascinating. There were 85 new members of Congress who came in the 116th Congress. And, you know, the truth is that I think, unlike some other Congresses, the really unique part of this one is so many of us have lived life experiences that are similar to or once reflected in our constituents. You know, I shared that I grew up in a mobile home court. I worked 2 jobs to put myself through college. I worked my way up in a Fortune 500 company. And so what's fascinating is so many of us have those lived life experiences. And even though it's, you know, the Democratic caucus is pretty broad ranging in terms of you've got everything from Blue Dog Caucus to Progressive Caucus to the New Dem Caucus, which I'm the co-chair of the Healthcare Task Force. We all really respect one another. And despite our ideological differences, we really do get along very, very well. How do you get your voice heard? Well, you make sure that you're speaking. You make sure that you're advocating for your constituents. And, you know, I have been a little bit unique, I think, as a Democratic member in that I've also advocated for Democrats and Republicans to work together again in this country. And, you know, the truth of the matter is neither political party benefits when members work together because, you know, they like to kind of keep us off in our own little corners and supporting and towing the party line. And the truth is, you know, I didn't grow up in politics. I didn't sit around and say, one day I'd love to be a politician. I actually just thought that I could serve my neighbors in my communities and that my background and experience would lend itself well to that. So, you know, that makes me, I think, well positioned to basically do what I think is the right thing for my district and not worry about the rest of it.
That's beautiful. I can certainly relate as well. I grew up single mom and had a similar kind of background, and I think it is really inspiring to see people bring their humanity to their work. So how did you build relationships with the other freshmen and with leadership to advance your key priorities?
Well, the truth is there's nothing that can replace just getting to know someone. You know, I remember being on a train after we were sworn in with freshmen across the Congress, including Republicans. And I had never met Congressman Pete Stauber, who had been elected from the 8th Congressional District of Minnesota, and never sat down and talked with him. And so on that train, he was reading a newspaper and I was grabbing a beer, and I just sat down and we started talking. We discovered that we had each had a 17-year-old's name, Isaac. We discovered that we had each one child who has learning challenges. And so just getting to know one another on a human level, you cannot replace that. And that's where I think we can be a different nation if we get back to just getting to know the humanity of each other. And Pete and I don't agree on every topic. And the truth is, I don't agree with all of my Democratic colleagues on every topic. And that's okay, because if we get to know each other on a human level, then we're going to be a better country and we're going to be better lawmakers.
Absolutely, building those bridges. But you make a good point in terms of having to hold a particular perspective. In the process of getting the medical device tax repealed, you had to take some tough votes. How were you viewed by your fellow Democrats and Republicans?
Well, the truth is, I got myself in trouble a couple of times, along with Congressman Dean Phillips of Minnesota. We were so opposed to the medical device tax that we ended up voting with Republicans a couple of times to repeal it. And in one of those instances, we voted against the rule, which is really a procedural vote that would stop a bill from coming to the House floor. But there was another procedural vote that contained a repeal of the medical device tax in it, and I voted for it with Republicans. And so, we ended up getting ourselves in trouble, to be honest with you, with the Democratic Party and with, in particular, the Speaker of the House. But this goes back to, look, if I think it's the right policy, I don't really care which side of the aisle it's on. And, I'm almost, I'm 48 years old. I've raised 4 kids. I've survived middle school 4 times. And so, if I'm going to get yelled at by someone in my own party, so be it. I'm a big girl and I can take it.
Right. Well, so there's a broader leadership lesson there, right? How would you say that experience contributed to your leadership style?
Well, it's the experience of having 4 kids or the experience of surviving middle school 4 times.
Well, both. I have 4 kids too. And my 2 youngest are graduating from middle school right now, so I can definitely relate.
Well, look, all my kids have been different. They're all amazing, and they've turned out to be amazing human beings. They're between 17 and 22-year-olds now. They're all 4 boys, and they've all presented different challenges, and I've had to adjust as a parent and as a mom, and as a human being as a result of just understanding each of them and their learning styles and, how best to parent them. And they're not all the same. And I think the same can be true in any work situation. When you're a leader, not the same approach doesn't work for everyone. And so, I think being a mom is the best job I've ever had. And they have taught me many life lessons that, you take into the frame of a member of Congress. And coming back to the whole point of lived life experiences, my wife and I have been married for 12 years. There were many years before that we couldn't get married in this country. And so just taking, the challenges you've had and turning them into, opportunities to advocate for what you believe in and to be able to present your values. It's important. It's all important. And, we're learning each and every day how to be better leaders across this country.
That is beautifully said. My kids and the process of being a parent is always putting me back on myself in a way that I find helps my career as well. So shifting gears here, we're calling each other from a quarantine, right? So there are now 2 worlds, pre-COVID and post-COVID. So which of your key priorities became particularly active in light of COVID? I'm thinking of access and affordability, but I'm curious how COVID has shaped some of your med tech priorities.
Well, I don't know that it's shaped or reshaped. What it has done is just accelerated, my commitment to figuring out how do we get to universal health care in this country. I led Medicare health policy as well as reimbursement policy dealing with Medicare as a senior executive at St. Jude Medical. That reported to my group. And, I think a pandemic certainly exposes the fragmented nature of your healthcare system. It also exposes, to be quite candid, the fee-for-service system that we all operate under today, where when elective procedures were shut down across this nation, many of my hospitals were in just desperate need because, frankly, they weren't performing the profitable procedures anymore. They were furloughing nurses and doctors in many instances at the same time we were in a public health crisis. So it's only made me resolved even more to help us transition to a world in which everyone has access to a basic level of health care. But we also have to make sure that the unintended consequences of that move are not that we shut down innovation in this country. American companies, are committed to the best healthcare in the world, but we're not always rewarding the most cost-effective healthcare in the world. And so, as we look at bundled payment, as we look at how do we reward companies who come up with technologies that reduce costs? My own personal experience in med tech is it's very difficult to balance the innovation with the payment side, since the really healthcare system rewards volume over outcomes. And so we've got to figure out how we manage that. And at the same time, I've been really worried about my rural hospitals in a COVID-19 world and their ability to survive. About half of my district is in rural areas of Minnesota. And so, it's just, it's made me even more committed than ever. And, the truth is I represent a district that the president won in 2016. And so the deal I've made with this district is I'm going to do what I think is the right policy. I'm not going to, go around for the sake of it, criticizing the administration. But I will tell you that as we've been in the middle of this pandemic, I've had to speak out and say, I believe we should have a national strategy on testing. I believe we should have a national supply chain strategy. I believe we should have a national food supply chain strategy. In other words, there comes a point where at the federal level, we do need to lead it. I think back to St. Jude Medical, and we had 6 divisions, and I worked for our corporate office, and we never would have had our 6 divisions bidding against one another, and then the corporation bidding against them. That just doesn't make good business sense, and I don't think it makes good federal policy either.
Right. Just following that train of thought, I guess people would maybe challenge that thought, saying, well, you're not going to get the best innovation if you don't let the city states, as it were, make their own decisions, and you're going to slow things down if you go through federal. What would you say to that kind of challenge?
Well, I think coordination at the federal level and doing everything centrally are 2 very, very different conversations. As I think about the other priority that I've been focused on, I'm a member of the House Committee on Small Business. I actually own part of a small startup company in St. Paul, even right now. And my belief has been that federal government creates policy and leadership, and then you do allow a level of capitalism and competition within it. But at the federal level, for example, we launched Project Airbridge, which is great. I give the administration credit for getting personal protective equipment into the U.S. At the same time, once it gets here, it's a free-for-all as to who's going to get it, driving up the price for our states and our communities. And so there's got to be sort of a level of coordination at the federal level in order to make sure that everyone's playing on a level playing field. What I've always believed is that in business, you just need to know the rules of the road. You just need to know what the rules are, and and not change them. The Small Business Administration, for example, has issued 30 sets of guidance since this Paycheck Protection Program was announced, and some of it's been conflicting. And so there has to be a level of federal leadership, but at the end of the day, for example, on the small business side, I led the effort to make sure that the PPP program was rolled out at the local SBA lender level, because I believed that those banks would be much more capable than sort of a centralized conduit that the Small Business Administration. So I do think it's a balance, but that doesn't mean we can't have federal policy, federal rules, and then everybody else just needs to, the companies stay within the guardrails of that federal policy. Otherwise, companies are looking at 50 different, and 51 if you want to include the District of Columbia, rules of the road in which to compete within, and I hear that complaint as well on federal policy from time to time.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And as the CEO of a healthcare company myself, I've been incredibly impressed with how everyone came together in Washington to roll out big things like PPP in record time. It's absolutely incredible. So thank you for your leadership on that. And it's been really interesting also at AdvaMed. I sit on the Excel board, which is the small companies board, and we're looking at PPE that's coming in and how we allocate it, making those ethical decisions. It's not obvious, and I think having coordination is incredibly important for a fairly orderly progress. So thank you for that. When it first became a possibility as a pandemic, how did you make decisions within your own office, and how did you manage priorities for your constituents during that time?
Well, it was clear as we were still running around the Capitol and seeing hundreds of people a day that this was headed our way, and so we actually sent our staff to work remotely a few days before a lot of our states went into lockdown mode, and just to work out any of the issues we would have. And I'm so proud of my team. They have continued to book every single meeting that we would have taken if we'd been in Washington via Zoom or technology. And my team really stepped up to lead during this very difficult time period. And I have just heartbroken by the stories, particularly of small business owners who are having to make those tough decisions right now. We have about 315 businesses that we've been able to assist in some way since the beginning of really the stay-at-home orders. And that work continues on their behalf as we advocate to get the terms of the Paycheck Protection Program changed to extend the payback period and provide additional flexibility on how they can spend the money, and also push back the period of time that you can spend the money and have the loan forgiven. So we just, my team, my staff, they have transitioned to remote working and just continued to plow forward and serve the people of this district.
It's been a really inspiring time. There's so much gratitude to have for the people that are making this time possible. Shifting a little bit, you've had a strong stance and shown considerable leadership in response to chronic disease. And as a parent of a child with type 1 diabetes, I certainly resonate on a personal level. COVID's been particularly challenging for people with chronic disease. How do you see COVID impacting those issues?
I represent one of the highest rates of non-elderly pre-existing constituents in the country. 51% of my constituents have a pre-existing condition, which is why I've been such an advocate for, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater on the ACA. Let's figure out what's working. I mean, I implemented it at St. Jude. I know it's not perfect. And so that's why I've been advocating for things like, a reinsurance program to put a ceiling on those costs so that we can get the premiums down in the individual marketplace. It's why I've advocated on prescription drug cost issues. It's why I introduced a bill that would lower the cost of insulin, because as you've said, it's just unbelievable that people are having to ration their insulin in this nation of so much. So, I believe that there is a response to chronic conditions and sort of an awareness here as we work our way through COVID-19 that we have this higher set of risks because of this pandemic, but we have got to continue to focus on solutions and innovations that help address chronic conditions in this country. We've got to invest more, not less, in the National Institutes of Health. We got to invest in the CDC. We've got to make sure that our county health departments have the resources that they need. And the truth is, this pandemic has laid bare the lack of preparation and investment in this country in many, many areas.
Right. So from a leadership perspective, when we think about the collaboration between lawmakers and industry, where do you see the importance of collaboration in getting innovation to in diabetes, for example?
Well, look, the market itself, right? The industry itself has got to be able to collaborate with many of our federal agencies. I worked under the authority of the Food and Drug Administration for a number of years, and of course now I'm seeing what it's like to have authority over instead of being under some of these government agencies. And it does require tremendous, tremendous collaboration between industry, between the Food and Drug Administration, between CMS, because the truth is we can put all the different products in the world on the market, but unless there's coordination between that and our payer systems, that technology is not going to be taken up across this country. And as you look at chronic conditions and prevention too, that's a big part of the equation. One of the things I have often said is at St. Jude, I just got so sick and tired of the conversation being just about treatment without any discussion of how we actually introduce prevention into the U.S. healthcare system. So, lawmakers are not good at collaboration. My observation is that, everyone, when it gets hard, goes back to their corners of wherever their political party might reside. I really respect those lawmakers who are willing to stand there longer and say, you know what, our healthcare system isn't perfect today, but we don't want to throw the whole thing out and start over again and have, completely government provided healthcare. If we look at the Veterans Administration system, I think we'd all agree that that certainly isn't a perfect system. I see some good, and many of my veterans receive very good care. And then there are a ton of gaps that require accountability and oversight.
Oh, beautifully said. It's actually a great opportunity to nod to what AdvaMed does. I'm a CEO of a women's health company, and we focus on preventative solutions as well. And AdvaMed's been incredibly helpful, not just to my company, but to industry in helping companies understand what resources are available to them and also how to collaborate within that so that we're developing innovations that are cost effective and improving outcomes. Because if they're not both, it's going to be really difficult to continue the pipeline of success. And so I can certainly appreciate your comments with regard to those topics. Next level down within the Women's Executive Network at AdvaMed, we focus on highlighting successful leaders like yourself and amplifying their voices to attract the top talent to the medtech industry. I know that while you were at St. Jude, you launched a Women in Business program that brought more women into management roles. How do you see the role of women's organizations in building that case for diversity in leadership?
That's a great question. And I am so proud of the program that we built at St. Jude Medical. And the truth is we did a couple of things really well, and it really did move the needle very quickly. When I became the head of HR, I'd already been in executive leadership at St. Jude for about 8 or 9 years. So I came to that new role as a new head of global HR with credibility with my presidents. I'd worked with them in the area of corporate relations for years. And so I asked them to do one thing. I asked every single executive, and the truth is most of them were men, to serve as a mentor to one high potential woman. Be a mentor, but also be an advocate, get to know them. And so we asked them to give their time, which they agreed. And then I asked my global HR team to do just one thing. Every time we have an opening for a director or above level, I need you to make sure there's one qualified woman in the applicant pool. Because the truth is, we would often have very qualified women for these roles and they wouldn't put their hand up. So the whole point of the partnership with my executive team was, if we saw an opening director position, I'd have, the VP of supply chain call a couple of my high potential women and say, you should go for that. And inevitably, what would happen is they'd say, well, I only meet 7 of the 10 qualifications. And I would call them back and say, do you understand, if you were a man and you met 2 of the 10, you might actually apply for this job. So we're not telling you you're going to get the job, but we want your name in the mix. And so we built this really interesting partnership and trust within our own executive women community, where they understood we were going to be advocating for their promotion and advancement in our business. And over the 4 years that I was the head of global HR, we moved the numbers from 18% of women in our management to 40% of our management were women. I'm really proud of that.
Wow, that is incredible. I agree. It's going to take time, and we're all going to get there together. It's really about collaboration. So thank you for that. This has been a wonderful conversation. Is there anything you want to add?
Oh, Tracy, thank you so much. It's just an honor to be representing my district. And, all of us come from somewhere. We come from, a life before business. And what I would say is the biggest advice that I got coming up sort of the corporate ladder was, do things you love and it's just going to work out. And so I've always just tried to put myself in a position where I'm in roles that I'm passionate about, that I have continuous learning, that I have an opportunity to grow and pass that on to other individuals and especially women. And it's an honor to represent my district, and I'm grateful that I know this sector so well, because I hope that puts me in a good position to advocate for innovation.
Well, it has been an honor to share this time with you. Thank you so much. Stay well, and thank you again.
Thank you. Have a good day.